Hi guys, good morning. Thank you for joining me. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Nicole Sanders. I am from Early Intervention Therapist Services. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the most frequently asked questions that I get as a therapist in relation to autism. I'm really excited to be speaking on this week. It has been Autism Week and we've had some great conversations in regards to autism. It's a big topic. It's a popular topic right now in today's society. Parents are worried. They are concerned. Does my child have autism? How do I know if they have autism? They already have a diagnosis of autism. Where do we go from here? So it's a hot topic right now in today's society. So I'm so honored to be here to speak about it a little bit, at least from what I know of it. I will give you a little bit of a background before I kind of dive into some of the things I'll be discussing, but I'm a developmental therapist, and so I work with kids that have all sorts of delays and diagnoses, but one of them is autism, and that is probably the most frequently diagnosis that I do see is autism. Part of one of my many jobs has been to assess children who have autism. I am not a doctor, pediatrician, or a psychologist, so I cannot diagnose it, but I'm very experienced in noticing the signs of autism, and that way we can go ahead and get them to a pediatrician and get a diagnosis. So I'm very experienced in that area, and so I get a lot of questions from parents because of that. When they find out that I have experience in that, they want to know, hey, can you look at my child? Can you tell me, is this normal, or am I overreacting, or is this a sign? Sometimes we kind of fall on that border and we don't know, like, well, he toe walks, but a lot of my friends' kids toe walk. Does that mean my child has autism or what? So it's kind of nice sometimes to be able to sit and assess a child, or just even answer some questions from parents who might have questions about those things. So I compiled a list of some of the most frequently asked questions that I get from parents in regards to autism, and so that's what I thought we could talk about today, and I could address some questions that you might have. And if there's any questions that you still further have, please feel free to message me and we can talk a little bit further about that. But I'd like to kind of dive on into some of the questions that I do get asked as a therapist. What are the most common signs that I see as a therapist? Parents will ask me that, like, hey, what are some of the big red flags that you see, to see if their child kind of fits in that. And I can tell you some of the things when I'm sitting with the child and I'm watching how they work and how they interact. I can tell you just off the top of my head some of the biggest things that I can pinpoint really quickly. One of them is a speech delay. Typically kids who, and again, this is typically, it doesn't always, autism is a spectrum disorder. That does not necessarily mean it's the above all be all, but a speech delay. Sometimes kids on the spectrum have a speech delay. It's very confusing because you can also have a speech delay and not have autism. So that's one of the first signs that parents come to me with is, hey, my child's not speaking. I also know that that's a red flag for autism. Does that mean that my child has autism? Not necessarily at all. It can be just a speech delay. That does not mean that your child has autism. But when we do see kids on the spectrum, a lot of times they are also exhibiting a speech delay as well. So I hope that that's a little bit of a clarification and makes sense a little bit, but a speech delay is usually the first sign that I see, and it's usually the first thing that a parent will come to us with is, hey, my child's not talking. And then we start to assess them a little bit further for autism. The next thing is non-social. We have a lot of kiddos on the spectrum who are not social kiddos. That's why this can be confusing, because I have had kids that I've worked with diagnosed with autism. They are very loving, they are very affectionate, and they actually are social. So that's why it can be very misleading for parents, because I have some parents who say, yeah, but my kiddo actually is a social kiddo. Does that mean he or she has autism? I've also had pediatricians before say the same thing. They will not diagnose it because we have a kiddo who's very social, and they're like, nope, that does not fit an autism marker. So I have kind of seen a bit of both, but that is one of the key things that I do notice with autism is that a lot of kids don't necessarily, because they don't know how to communicate as well, it makes it harder to hang out with other kids, to talk to other kids, to want to be around other kids. And so sometimes they like to stay, we call it, in their own little bubble. They like to stay in their own little bubble sometimes. That feels most comfortable for them. So socialization is a big one. We start to look at that, at 2 years of age. Are they wanting to play with other kids? Are they sharing their toys? Are they engaging with other kids at all? Or do we take them to the playground and they basically just play by themselves the entire time? We look at kind of those social behaviors a little bit. So that's one thing that I look at. If I'm doing in-home therapy, it's a little different because I can't assess this social engagement a little bit because they're usually at home, or it might be just another sibling there, but I can see how they even interact with adults. Do they recognize when a stranger has walked into their home? Do they address a stranger at all? Do they even recognize that a foreign person is now in their home? Whereas, some 2-year-olds will run up to you and say, oh, and kind of want you to hold them or be social. So that is one thing that I've probably noticed with kids on the spectrum is they're non-social. Again, that does not fit every child. I want to accentuate that a little bit because, again, I have kids who are diagnosed with autism and they actually are very social children. So it doesn't always mean that. Let me put that out there. Repetitive behaviors. What are some of the most, maybe we call them stimming behaviors as well? What are some of the stimming behaviors that we see and some of the repetitive behaviors that I typically see? Hand flapping is usually one of them. So if I'm assessing a child and I see them engage in hand flapping several times throughout maybe say an hour-long visit, I will generally red flag that for autism. Now, I get this question a lot from parents. They say, oh, but, little Johnny or so-and-so does that when they get really excited. So I kind of have to watch it a little bit more because some kids do that out of excitement. And again, that doesn't necessarily put them on the marker for autism, right? They can do it just, oh, my favorite show's on. They might do it like that, like, oh, daddy's home. They might get excited like that. Whereas kids on the spectrum, sometimes you kind of see them randomly doing it throughout the day. You don't really know if there's a reason behind it. They might do it out of excitement. So that is something, sometimes it's hard for me to assess a little bit. I like to see it in the moment. I also like to see how much are they doing it. Is this something that they're just maybe doing once every blue moon, once a week, once a day, or is this something that you are seeing consistently throughout the day? That kind of helps parents address if it's atypical or non-typical as well, because how much are they doing it? What's the frequency of their hand flapping? So hand flapping is one of them that I generally will see. I will also see spinning behaviors. And again, with parents who don't know some of the signs and symptoms, I always get, oh, little so-and-so loves to spin, like they're so active and they just love to spin in circles. For me, that's actually a red flag. So some parents think that's like great, whereas I'm like, wait, why are they spinning so much? They actually shouldn't be spinning that much. Yeah, do kids love to spin and be tossed up and love that stimulation? Absolutely, and we encourage that. But again, it's the frequency. How much are they doing it? Why are they doing it so much? What are they seeking? Hi, Chris. Hello. So again, some of these behaviors are typical, absolutely, but we look at how much are they doing some of these behaviors. That's when we red flag it. So let's see, we've got hand flapping, we've got spinning. I also have toe walking. Toe walking is a big one too. Again, it kind of falls in that, in between category. I get a lot of parents who will say, yeah, but my kids toe walked till they were 6 or 7 years old and they're fine. They didn't have, autism. And I totally agree with that. Toe walking does not mean that your child has autism. Absolutely not. But is that something that I have noticed with kids that have autism? Yes. So again, because we see some of these repetitive behaviors and they can be very typical behaviors, and then sometimes because the frequency and duration is happening so much throughout the day, they become atypical. We start to red flag those. So again, I get parents who will ask, well, how do I know? I'm just confused. Yeah, sometimes he hand flaps, but sometimes he doesn't. How do I know if he has autism or not? We try to really look at, again, that frequency and duration. How much is he doing it? Why is he doing it? Is it for no reason? Is it because he's excited? Is this happening multiple times a day? Same thing with the toe walking. We also start to kind of calculate it with other things. So it's like, if your child only has a speech delay but he's not showing any other signs, then okay, that's a speech delay. Or if he's toe walking, but he's not showing any other signs. Okay, he maybe, his feet are a little tight and he's just toe walking, or he doesn't like, to wear shoes, or whatever the case may be. But when we start to kind of add all of these things up, like, oh, he does have a speech delay, oh, he is hand flapping, oh, he does engage in spinning behaviors, oh, he is toe walking, oh, he is a picky eater. When we start to slowly add all of those check marks up, that's how we can start to see, like, okay, he's meeting, he or she is meeting some of the criteria for autism. So it can be really tricky to kind of navigate that, whether it's typical or atypical. So those are probably the most repetitive behaviors that I would probably see. What else do I see? Speech delay, not being social, repetitive behaviors, and then picky eating. A lot of the kids that I assess, one of the first things parents will say is, I cannot get this child to eat certain things. They are super picky. They have aversions to different food textures, taste, things like that. Again, are kids picky eaters? Absolutely. That does not, just because you have a picky eater, don't run to your pediatrician. That does not mean that they have autism. But if they're checking some of those other boxes in combination with picky eating, we get to be a little more concerned about those behaviors. But most of the kids that I've worked with on this spectrum, most of them do have some picky eating habits that we tend to see. And I'll kind of get a little bit more into the picky eating thing a little bit later. But again, is picky eating normal for most kids? Yeah, they definitely go through a picky eating stage. But what if we have a kiddo who's not getting off the bottle? He's 2 years old and he is stuck to that nipple. He loves that texture. He loves milk. He will not give it up. He loves the pacifier still. He's not giving it up because it's a comfort. It's a texture that he's seeking. They won't eat certain fruits, certain veggies. They like a lot of crackers. They like a lot of the crunchy things. If we start to kind of look at their actual eating patterns, we can see a little bit more. That's why typically when I work with parents, one of the first things that I tell them as a therapist, do a food diary for me. I want to look at what your child is eating and not eating. So I would recommend that too. Do a food diary for your kid. And what that means, keep it simple. I always say, we are busy people. Let's not make this harder than it is. Put a piece of paper up on your refrigerator. Just quickly write down, gave him strawberries, wouldn't eat it. Put a check, put an X. Yes, if he did, cross if he didn't, whatever. However your system is, keep it very simple. But do a food diary. Over even a week time span, I can kind of look at a food diary as a therapist and say, oh yeah, we're already seeing some behavioral patterns that he is veering away from. It's like fruits, it's a texture thing, it's a this thing. And so that can kind of help us a little bit. So what are the most common signs? Again, I'll kind of recap and review that. It's going to be socialization. Are they social with other kids? Are they friendly with other kids? Are they affectionate with you guys? Or do they pretend or prefer to play alone? Repetitive behaviors, whether that's hand flapping, toe walking, spinning. I should have included this in because I see this quite a bit, but the spinning of the wheels is true. Parents read that a lot online, but I would say that actually is accurate. Sometimes I will see kids, I'll give them a car just to see how they play with it. That's all I'm looking at. Here's a car, play with this car. How are you going to play with that? Are you going to roll it around? Are you going to go up and down? Are you going to have some pretend play with that? Or is it going to be flip the car over and let's spin the wheel? Again, is that typical of every child with autism? No, but a lot of the kids that I have seen, give them a car, see what they do with those wheels. Lining up would fall in that repetitive behavior a little bit too. Sometimes kids will line things up obsessively. And so parents will notice that, hey, he's like lining his crayons up in every single order every single time. I will tell you the term that I usually get is OCD. I have parents, when they're not familiar with autism, they will come to me and say, Nicole, he shows some real OCD behaviors. And I'm like, okay, thanks for telling me that. That's important. So sometimes it's not OCD, but sometimes it may look like that to a parent. So those are some of the most common signs that I see and that I get asked. Some of the most common questions that I get asked. Hey, is this normal? Is he, he's spinning. Is that a normal thing, or is he just having fun with himself? So those are some of the most common things. I'll kind of keep it moving now a little bit because there's some other bullet points that I want to talk about. One of the questions that I get asked is, what age do you see signs? Great question too. And so I will tell you, usually at 2, for me as a therapist and someone who assesses autism, I can usually see very clear signs at 2 years of age. That might seem very young for some people. I get kind of critiqued a lot in that. Some people say, there's no way you can tell by the age of 2. Sometimes you absolutely can. And I've worked different places, different states, different regions. Where I'm at on the West Coast, initially they would not diagnose until the age of 3 because they really wanted to give it some time to actually see some of these behaviors. But now we are definitely diagnosing well before 3. There's a lot of pediatricians who will diagnose before 3. 2 is the average age that I see. That is the average age that I see a lot of the signs very distinctly, very clearly, because especially by 2, you are showing a speech delay typically by then. It is a very clear speech delay by then. You are showing some of those repetitive behaviors. We're looking for those social engagements. By 2, we can look for that imaginative play. Are they dressing up? Are they play pretending? Are they rolling the cars appropriately? Those kinds of things. So by 2, a lot of those behaviors that we're looking for, it's pretty prevalent. You can see that at 2. I want to give a story. I can't help it. I've said this story so many times to people though, and maybe you can relate as a parent. I had a parent that I worked with, and she brought her child to us at 9 months old, and she said, something's wrong with my baby. I don't know what it is. Something's wrong. And at the time, the clinic that I worked at said, we cannot look at your baby at 9 months. He's not even showing any delays yet. Like, we can't do anything for you. Sent her away, told her to come back at 18 months. She came back at a year. He was 12 months. She said, no, something's wrong with my baby. I've had 3 other kids. I know something's wrong. Can you please help me? They said, legally, we cannot do anything. It was the state that I was working in. They couldn't do anything. They said, bring him back at 18 months. She brought him back at 18 months. And that's probably one of the youngest kids that I've seen clear as day with very classic autism signs. And so I asked her, I said, when did you start seeing signs and what were they? And she told me, she said, I started seeing signs at 4 months. And she said, I am a mom of 4 other kids, or 3 or 4 other kids. And she said, I know what typical development is and I know what atypical is. And she said at 4 months old, he was very non-affectionate. He didn't love to be held or nurtured. He was very colicky, had a hard time sleeping, which is typical again of 4-month-olds, but she just felt like it wasn't typical. And then he would watch the fan. She said, I would lay him down and he would sit there all day and just look at the fan spin. And then he started to, 9 months came, 12 months, it was a, gross motor delay. He wasn't walking. There was a speech delay, was engaging in some repetitive behaviors. She knew, she had a great mother's intuition. And so she knew, even at 4 months, she felt like there were some signs. I have heard that through being in this field. I have heard parents tell me, I knew from a very young age that there were some markers that they just were not hitting. So again, the average age that we diagnose, or that we can see signs, I shouldn't say diagnose, the average age that we can start to see signs is 2 years of age. As a professional, have I seen it earlier? Absolutely. I have seen kids at 18 months that I can already see certain signs in. But I'm sure you guys as parents, I always say, you are the expert. You know your child, and you know if something is typical or not typical for them. You know if they are doing something that you feel like is development for other kids versus, they're not developing at the same rate as other kids. I feel like you know your kids the best. So I always trust parents when they come to me at a very early age and they say, hey, I know he's only 18 months, but I think he's showing some signs. I trust that. I say, okay, let's take a look at him. Or he or she. I always say him, but he or she. So 2 though. 2 is the average age that you can feel very confident that we can see some signs. So we'll keep that moving. What's the average age? The next thing that I get asked is it genetic? And this is such a big one because, parents just always feel so bad. It's, did I do something wrong? Did I eat something wrong? Did I, what went wrong? And I get that a lot, especially from moms. They feel so guilty about it. And this is what I will tell you guys about that. Is it genetic? There's still a lot of research going on with that. So it's always hard because autism is newer. I hate to say it, but it is a bit on the newer side. And I'll even give you background to that. 10 years ago when I was in the field, I didn't see as many kids with autism diagnosed as I do now. So it is definitely becoming more diagnosed, I would say. And so the research is still a little new, and it's hard to kind of explain that to parents because they want answers. You want answers, right? Really fast and really quick. Unfortunately, we don't have those answers just yet because it's still a lot of research is being done. There has been a genetic link to autism though. So they are finding that there is a genetic component. They're not solely saying this specific gene causes autism. We don't have that information yet, but a lot of the research is showing there tends to be a little bit of a genetic trait there, some way, somehow. And so we are seeing that. I will tell you just in my experience, this does not mean it's correct by any means. I'm just saying experience. I tend to see it in more boys. And I do think the research is even showing it's more prevalent in boys. I don't think it is. I should be confirmed on that. It is showing that it's more prevalent in boys than girls. And I would agree with that. Out of my experience, just say probably, doing a generalization, 8 out of 10 is probably what I see the ratio. I mean, I typically see so many more boys than I do girls. I also see, or I hear when I'm speaking with parents and they have a newly child who's diagnosed, they will say, oh, well, you know what? I actually had somebody in my extended family who has autism as well. I tend to hear that a lot. So that's why I would also probably agree that there is definitely a genetic link there somehow, some way. I will also say at least the states that I've worked in as well, if one of your children has autism, where I'm currently at, they will already go ahead and basically red flag or monitor your second child. So especially if you have a boy, a lot of moms that I have worked with, if their older child is diagnosed with autism, they will go ahead and the pediatricians will go ahead and start saying, I want to see your second child early on. Let's go ahead and get them assessed. Let's make sure, because they're seeing that genetic link a little bit. So they want to go ahead and start monitoring your other children. Again, that's not everywhere. Unfortunately, I work in a pretty fast forward state right now. They're very progressive on things like that. So they want to go ahead and get a head start. But that's not everywhere. But yes, so I get that question a lot. Like, did I do something wrong? You didn't do anything wrong. There's no way to control this. Again, it's research, so there's a lot of theories out there right now, but I encourage you to do as much research as you can on your own. Also, don't believe everything that you read, though, too. There's a lot of different good and bad research out there. But I always tell moms you couldn't have done anything differently. This is not something you ate while you were pregnant and wow, your child has autism, or you drank something bad, or you were exposed to something. There's no controlling this at this point. So all you can do is do the best that you can with the cards that you have, which I know you guys are all doing great. Okay, so next question. Will they grow out of it? I get that question quite a bit. Parents are really concerned. Will this follow them for the rest of their lives? Are they going to have to be in a special ed class for the rest of their life? What does this mean? Typically, when you have a child who is either being diagnosed or showing the signs at an early age, say 2, you get overwhelmed. You start to have those panic attacks of, what is my future going to look like? What 20 years from now is my life going to look like? Do I have to give up on every dream that I have for this child? And so I'm immediately bombarded with those questions as to, what is my future going to look like? Are we going to have to put him in a special ed classroom? What does this mean? I want to answer that so many different ways, and this is how I try to answer it for families. Will they grow out of it? Is it something you can grow out of? I always say, with therapy, it can help. That's why I'm a huge promoter of early intervention, because early intervention has proven, studies, research has proven to help with child development and to help with the behaviors. Will they ever grow out of the diagnosis? Maybe not. They might not grow out of that diagnosis. That diagnosis might be with them forever. But do the behaviors that they have, will they grow out of those? Absolutely, with the proper training and help and tools that we try to provide parents with. Yeah, I have kids who go to regular functioning classrooms. I have kids who can function in everyday society and life. But again, autism is a spectrum disorder. And so that's what I tell parents. You can, it goes from like a scale of 1 to 10, and your child could literally fall anywhere in on that spectrum. And so that we have to give a little bit of time as they progress. I work with typically 4 and under, 3 and under kids. And so at 3, your life is going to look very different than it will when they are at the age of 10. Hopefully, because we've gotten early intervention, we've gotten some techniques, we can teach them different tools. But yes, it's a spectrum disorder, so each child is different, and the whole wait and see method, unfortunately, is sometimes what we have to do. Oh, sorry, I'm reading some comments as well, and I'll try to answer them as I can. So yes, it is a spectrum disorder, and will they grow out of it? Not necessarily grow out of it, but their behaviors will hopefully get better with time. Let's see, Danielle. My son seems to be getting worse as he gets older. Let's see if I can read it. My son seems to be getting worse as he gets older. He's 9, autistic, special school, severe learning disabilities. Oh, I see. So your son seemed to get worse as he got older. I am curious if you guys had ever had or currently have therapy too. I'm curious about that, and how is therapy working for you, Danielle? I'd love to know that too. Even though I'm such a advocate of early intervention and therapy, dependent on your child's spectrum disorder, depends on the progress that we can make as well. So yeah, I'll get back to that. But will they grow out of it? I hope that somewhat answers it. Hopefully early intervention usually will help with some of those behaviors that you're having. Let's see, picky eating. That's the other thing that I get asked about. So parents are really concerned about picky eating habits. And they, again, don't know, is that autism, or are they just a picky eater? With autism, we definitely do tend to see that kids are picky eaters. What to do about picky eating? That's why I wanted to kind of cover that in a separate section. I really love occupational therapists. I think they're great for this. Speech therapists, I think, even have a background in this. That's why I really recommend that if you are able and have the resources for that. Otherwise, there's a lot of things you can do about picky eating that I try to recommend. And I honestly, I could go on and on about picky eating, and so maybe I'll do a separate, if you guys are interested in that at all, I can do a separate video about picky eating and ways that we can address that. But picky eating is definitely something that we see with autism, and so I encourage parents, if you have a picky eater, to definitely try to seek an occupational therapist, developmental therapist, speech therapist, nutritionist, feeding specialist, anyone in that field who can try to help you with that, because it's an issue. And unfortunately, even where I'm at, a lot of pediatricians don't find it to be that big of an issue, but parents tend to find that to be a big issue. Parents will come to me and say, listen, this is inconveniencing our lives, and not in like a inconvenience like a bad thing, but it's we want our child to eat, and he's losing weight, and he's not gaining weight, and we just want him to be able to eat. We can't go to restaurants. I have to pack a lunch. It's embarrassing that he's 3 and will only take a bottle still. What do I do? These are really important questions that to pediatricians, they don't actually seem to think is a huge issue sometimes, or at least the ones that I've worked with. I shouldn't, again, stereotype. Sometimes they don't put that very high, but parents put that very high on their list. They're like, hey, I want my child to eat, and they're not eating. What do we do about this picky eating? So yes, that's some of the most frequently asked questions that I do end up getting. What to do about picky eating? Is this genetic? Will they grow out of this? What's our future going to look like? What are the most common signs? And what age is it mostly diagnosed at? Those are some of the most common things that I get asked by parents. I'm going to keep this video kind of short because sometimes I can ramble on and on. But please feel free to ask me some of your questions. You can message me. I'm horrible at getting notifications. But I will definitely try to check them. It's something, I think my phone doesn't show notifications, but I will definitely try to check them and answer them. So if you have questions about things that you feel like are typical or atypical, or that you're not sure about, I would encourage you to definitely reach out to your pediatrician as well. Your pediatrician, any kind of specialist that's out there, reach out and try to get some more information about that. But I'm also one of them. I mean, parents ask me daily, things that they are concerned about. But those are some of the most frequently asked ones that I get asked by parents. So I hope that helped in some kind of way. I just wanted to do kind of a quick FAQ type type speech this morning, just to address some of the most common things. Again, I hope you can relate to something in there, some way, somehow. Please follow me on Instagram, Early Intervention or EI Therapy Services. You can message me through there, Gmail. I have a website, earlyinterventiontherapyservices.com, a Facebook. Feel free to message me anywhere if you're having any kind of questions or concerns as well, and we can kind of correspond on that. But I'm going to go ahead and jump off of here. I've kind of been rambling for a while, but yeah, please feel free to share, like this video if you have any questions or comments. I look forward to reading them. So have a great day, have a great Friday, and thanks for joining me, and happy Autism Week.